Lovely to see everyone here in Cayman. So I want to talk to you a little bit about consciousness in communities. Lots of sort of money being made here. I'm going to skip through some of the early stuff, and since we're short on time, hopefully everyone read that. Good.
I'd like to start out by giving a round of applause to Mike Kostash for putting together this fantastic event. This is the 15th D10E. I've been at practically every one of them thus far, and they keep getting better and better and better. And also thank you to Brock Pierce for that fantastic presentation. I've had the pleasure of working with him now for the past 5 years as a technologist on a variety of these projects, and they keep getting better and better and better. So I'd like to start with the question. You guys are all here because you're interested in blockchains. Well, what is, in fact, a blockchain? Now, there are technical answers and there are philosophical answers, and I want to touch on a little bit of both of these. So we can start by saying it is a distributed ledger. It is something that is spread amongst a whole bunch of peers around the world. It tells you who owns what and when, who has moved value from one place to the next. And it's a public ledger where you can see every single transaction as it's occurred from the beginning of time until today. And that way everyone can verify the transactions and we can all be assured that the value is safe. And it's a database of continuously growing records over time. So these records are immutable, they're unchangeable, and they are certain throughout time. There are two important aspects of any blockchain, and I say the most important aspects because the innovation brought forth by Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin, was this concept of digital scarcity. Now, in the real world, we deal with scarcity every day. There are only 2 of these clickers in this conference room. There's only so many pairs of shoes in the world. But with technology for the past 50 or 60 years, we didn't have digital scarcity. You could take a song or an MP3 and copy it 1 billion times, and it was the exact same copy every single time. So there was no actual value in a piece of digital content. But what a blockchain enabled was this concept of scarcity that could be limited, where Bitcoin only has 21 million tokens in existence, where managed issuers can say there are only X number of tokens that will ever exist, or I have control over them, and the network can see them. That is the primary innovation of the blockchain, is this concept of digital scarcity, and it sets us all free. Well, the second aspect is the assignment of ownership. There's a self-sovereign aspect to Bitcoins. When you have the key, you own that value. It distinguishes you as a self-sovereign individual, saying, I control the value that I produce. I can dispose of it as I like. It cannot be seized. This is a fantastic innovation that we all get to leverage and benefit from. Now, we started out with what I call algorithmic tokens. It is tokens where the code defines the rule set, and everyone can see the rules of the code. So it started with Bitcoin. It went on with Litecoin and Ethereum. Things like the number of tokens that exist become sacrosanct. They become an unchangeable rule of the blockchain itself. As I mentioned earlier, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins ever in existence. And so you can rely upon these things as an economic model going forward for the entire foreseeable future. This isn't like the Federal Reserve or a central bank that can print money at whim, which changes the economic rules for all the participants. This is a different, more stable aspect. There are a whole bunch of aspects and attributes of digital currencies. And the first 5 on the right here apply to all digital assets. And I'll get into the next 5 because this is where it gets really interesting and where we get to go. So the first 5 is these tokens are finite. Again, we know how many there are, 21 million Bitcoins, et cetera. We know for a fact that these things will never, ever change, and this is what empowers digital scarcity for us. We're also certain that these tokens are authentic. You can track every single token back to its origination point. Every coin that was ever mined has a birthday, and all transactions descend from that transaction. They're all transferable. Again, you have the key. You have the ability to assign the ownership of that value to any other party on the planet by snapping your fingers. And you don't have to ask permission from anyone to do this. They are possessible. Again, cannot be seized. You own them yourself because you have the password, you have the key. And they are traceable. You can see every movement and be certain that no one is spending your money twice, that you are certain that the payment that comes into you is valid. Now, this is a picture of a terrarium. This is a self-contained ecological system. It is a very, very good example of a balanced network. It is, in essence, decentralized. We have bacteria, we have plants, we have carbon dioxide, we have oxygen, we have water. We have delegation. Each one of these components of the system rely upon the others to stay in full balance. And there's checks and balances. And this thing is autonomous. If it has sunlight, this machine just keeps running and running and running perpetually with no other outside input. And it is entirely self-sufficient. Well, I'd like to propose a radical concept, and that is that blockchains and decentralized systems are in fact living things. Living things, like a microorganism. Now, I'm not talking about artificial intelligence. These things are very simple. but they are self-balancing systems where there is no server somewhere that someone is running. This is a series of messages that we pass amongst ourselves, and it stays perfectly balanced and self-sufficient throughout the entire life cycle of the token and the network. And if you look at the networks, they themselves form organic connections between one another. The nodes are all participating in an organic fashion with one another. And when you design a decentralized system, you actually find out that the digital scarcity is the circulatory system. It's a necessary component of a decentralized system that keeps it alive. And just like you can't drain the blood from my body, you can't extract value from a blockchain without killing it. What you have to do is build beautiful technologies and enabling things on the outside of those living systems and be the best service provider that can be provided on top of that network. So we started out with algorithmic tokens. Okay? The code said how many rules there were. We began asking the question of what other kinds of assets can exist. What if I wanted to manage the tokens? If I wanted to represent things in the real world? If I wanted to map digital scarcity to actual scarcity? Well, we created Tether. Brock Pierce, Reeve Collins, and myself were the founders of Tether. And we realized that you could actually pair the US dollar with a crypto asset and move dollars like you move bitcoins, things on a blockchain, getting all 5 of those rules, but applied to a real-world currency that we're all familiar with. But why couldn't you use equities, Apple stock, securities, real estate, property? Again, anything in the real world that is scarce now has the ability to be managed as tokens on a blockchain. But here's the interesting thing, and this is, again, where it gets fascinating for me, is all of these have one thing in common. They're actually all the same thing. Every Bitcoin is the same as every other Bitcoin. Every Tether is the same as every other Tether. They are fungible with one another. And this makes sense when you represent things in the real world, and these are familiar assets that we understand. This is where it gets very exciting. Again, 5 attributes of all of these digital assets. Here's how we got here. We started out with Bitcoin. We used mining and algorithmic issuance with explicit transactions. We then created Mastercoin. It was the first ICO in 2013, of which I was the founding CTO and Brock Pierce was a founding board member. It became the Omni layer, an on-chain meta protocol on top of Bitcoin for the managed issuance of tokens. And then we created Tether, the first dollar on the blockchain using this technology. What we realized in the past 3 years is that besides fungibility, we can begin to add rule sets to these tokens. We can make them different from one another. A very big pioneer named Eric Poulier met with some of us from Tether and was asking about beers. He said, well, you've got dollars, and you can redeem these tokens for dollars. Why can't you redeem them for beers? And we said, well, of course you could. You could have a beer token and go into a bar and swap it out. And he looked at us and he goes, what if the beer, if it didn't get used within a week, got warm, and you could no longer redeem it for a cold beer unless you did some other action? And I looked at Reeve and I said, I quit. We're building beers that get warm on a blockchain, because that is the most important invention of our lifetimes, is the ability to create autonomous digital objects. And here's where the extra 5 attributes come in. These tokens themselves individually can be programmable. You can give them their own rules. They can change state. They can be a beer that gets warm. They can become interactive, programmable game objects. If you've ever played Pokemon Go, you know you have to feed these things. They have a life cycle of themselves. And one Pikachu is not the same as the next Pikachu, because you have to train that Pikachu and feed that Pikachu, etc. So now all of a sudden, your tokens become interactive, digital, experiential objects. Now, once you can program these things, you can give them even new rule sets, like combinability. Imagine for the moment that instead of looking at a balance of how many Bitcoins I have in my wallet, I have a 3D interface where I can scan the room, and I can be walking around a mall, picking up a digital asset that is a puzzle piece. I can direct traffic around this mall to the yogurt shop, where if I put together all of these digital assets, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a bowl of yogurt. And now I can redeem that bowl of yogurt because I've fulfilled the rules of these tokens. Again, they're redeemable. You can trade them in for real-world goods. Imagine if I could put rules on a Coca-Cola, where I would want a free Coke. But Coca-Cola, of course, wants a viral spread and interest of their product. So the rule says I have to send a version of my token to 5 of my friends. And each time I do, the Coke bottle fills up a little bit more, until it's full again. And it sees this social graph and this social network of interaction that benefits the issuer of the token, it benefits the holder of the token, and again, all of the alignment of interests are the same. These tokens can be themselves network aware. They can listen to events off the blockchain. For example, this is Jeff Gordon. He is a NASCAR driver, big sport here in the US, or there in the US, and this is a collectible card. Now, anyone can buy the collectible card for Jeff Gordon, but if you hold that card, for example, when he wins the NASCAR race, you have something special, something that's unique. You now have a commemorative card. So now the value of the tokens can actually change based on outside events. Then you get to add artificial intelligence. You make these tokens entirely autonomous. They then begin to interact with one another on a blockchain and create, again, an ecological, biological system within a self-contained biological organism. So our opportunity right now is a trillion object opportunity. You have apps in your pocket. They're almost like digital objects, but you can't send an app to a friend because you don't actually own that app. You've licensed it. Well, and there are millions of apps. Millions of apps. Now imagine that each one was special, and you could own them and move them. Well, now there are trillions and trillions of possibilities for what these apps can do. So guys, the future is an intersection of two things. Okay, experiential technology, okay, the things that we want to interact with and play with, the thing that makes blockchains familiar, because the assets on them, again, aren't just balances in a wallet. They are things that I care about, that I want to survive, that I want to enable, and that I want to share. It's a combination of those things and your collective imagination, because this is a developer's paradise. If you want to create an object yourself, there are no permissions, there are no rules. You go out and you make this object. It can be anything that you want. And as long as you fulfill that community need, it becomes virally spread to the world, and you make a massive impact. So if you want more information about digital objects, check out block.io. Thank you, guys.